You're fine. It wasn't just you. All right, good evening. We'll call to order tonight's Committee of the Whole for the City of Gahanna. Today is Monday, June 24th of 2024. Before we move on to Section B, are there any corrections or additions to the agenda tonight? Any changes? Then I think first up on the agenda is a discussion. We have a presentation this evening from Bethany Sanders from the Franklin County Auditor's Office. She's going to share with us a little bit more about residential tax relief options and local property tax. Thanks for being here, Bethany.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and talk about this topic, which I do spend a fair bit of my time talking about, and we do really appreciate the opportunity to speak here. It's something that affects the county as a whole, the state as a whole, and certainly local governments and your constituents around the state. So the presentation you have has a decent amount of policy detail in it. I'm not going to read it word for word. We're going to go over that at a high level. I'm happy to answer questions tonight. I'm happy to meet one-on-one or in any committees or anything that's appropriate going forward. So we're going to talk about four basic topics this evening, kind of why property taxes are this essential role, but how they can become flawed and burdensome, the existing programs to reduce property tax burdens in the state of Ohio, some best practices for equitable residential property tax. There's been some pretty good academic research on this. I'm going to really focus on a report from the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy that came out a couple years ago, and some of the current proposals in Ohio that are pending in the legislature or likely to be pending in the legislature right now, this coming General Assembly, around this topic. So, what we've seen in the last year, in Franklin County especially, but also around the state, is that value changes are resulting in spikes and increases in property taxes that are causing a particular burden from residents. It would be great to say, okay, let's just cut the taxes across the board, but we also know that property taxes are a critical source of revenue for local government services entirely. No property tax funds go to support state level funding. It's all collected at the local level and goes to local government funding. It's become even more important in many ways as state level funding for local governments has gone down over the last 10 years through policy decisions made at the state level. This is not just an Ohio issue. This is how property tax tends to work. In 2019, 46% of local government revenue nationwide was property tax. So this is something that is reckoned with all across the country. And in Franklin County in 22, it was 34.1% of government revenue was property taxes. And it can be an equitable tax, right? But it's easy to fall into certain pitfalls as the programs are created and as they're layered on top of each other without making sure that you have some escape valves in the ways that taxes become burdensome. So we have three basic programs in Ohio at the state level to reduce property taxes. The first is across the board, the owner-occupied credit and non-business credits. These allow for a reduction in the cost of qualifying levies, and that portion of the levies is backfilled by state money, so there's no local revenue loss. It's 2.5% for the owner-occupied and 10% for the non-business credit, though no individual property in Ohio receives a full 2.5% or 10% off anymore, because in 2013, the legislature said that these reductions would only apply to levies that were enacted by 2013. So new levies do not get these rollbacks. The homestead exemption is for older adults and those with a disability. There's also some specialized homestead exemptions for surviving spouses of first responders and some other special categories, disabled veterans. But the 26.2 is the amount exempted from property values as a result of homestead. We're going to talk a little bit more about homestead in a second. And the last thing is we do have the equalization of tax rates, right? So this was the message from the auditor's office. You've probably heard it before, that as values go up, rates go down so that voted levies collect the same amount of money they were always approved to by voters. So that is a pro-property owner, pro-homeowner policy that we do have in Ohio. The homestead exemption it's been 10 years since the income requirement eligibility for the homestead exemption was put back into place. And that exemption does increase with inflation annually, but it is still quite low in general, just at about $38,600, I think, for this year, $38,600 or $38,200. So that's a really low threshold for a household. So if you have a couple older adults on Social Security, even just the Social Security income is likely to exceed the $38,000 amount for the benefit. And because the value of the exemption is fixed, it only just started going up with inflation this year, the cash value of it actually goes down when values go up and the tax rates fall, which has been fun to explain over the last 6 months. So for example, in 025, which is the largest taxing district in the city of Gahanna, the homestead exemption went from $653 to $533 from tax year 22 to tax year 23. So that's $120 in what the cash experience of residents increase in their tax bill, just because of how we calculate this exemption. And this year, the value of the exemption around the county is $328 to $678. It's calculated on a taxing district by taxing district level because different combination of levies apply to each property by taxing district.
Is that, Bethany, can I ask a quick
Yes.
question? The second to last bullet point, is that an annual, that's an annual, you're saying that's the value of the annualized property tax reduction?
Yes, when someone who receives the homestead exemption looks at their tax bill, they will see that it is a total reduction of $533 from what they would otherwise pay. And so, if they're paying in halves, that would mean it's about $217 knocked off each half of the tax bill. And a year ago, it would be $325 knocked off each half of the tax bill.
Thank you.
Yeah. So turning now to, so that's pretty much all we have in terms of relief programs, is those 3 buckets. Turning to some best practices, this is about, when we say best practices, Lincoln Land Institute approached this in a way that we think makes sense in the auditor's office, which is to preserve the key function of property taxes, but to have programs that minimize the likelihood of property taxes causing someone to have a housing insecurity or a tax burden, housing cost burden caused by taxes that will otherwise undermine the stability of their financial well-being and their life. And so the best practices relate to circuit breakers, which we're going to talk about in more detail. There is a bill pending in the legislature for that, where it simply means that if your property taxes exceed a portion of your a designated portion of your income, you're going to get some of that money back. And deferrals, which don't give anyone a permanent tax break, but if you simply do not have the income to cover your taxes, the due date for those taxes can be delayed, sometimes by years, often until the home is sold or something happens that drastically changes your income. And so this area of recommendation is where Ohio law is most lacking. And so we could have statewide options or we could have local control options, but those would have to be enacted at the General Assembly. So here are some of the buckets and information around the state of the different kind of formats. So you have a homestead exemption and credits. We have those in property tax land. Homestead essentially means the owner-occupied credit. So we do have that, so bully on us. We even have an income-based homestead credit in the form of our homestead exemption. We're in that seniors-only bucket for that. But we do not have deferrals or circuit breakers. And even when you look at the best practices, our homestead exemption and credits are not flat dollar. They're percentage-based and they're shrinking as new levies are passed. And we certainly, it is the position of the auditor's office that the existing eligibility thresholds for the homestead exemption do not meet need. And some other recommendations that we'll get into when we talk about the individual legislation to just make sure you're covering the whole field. We also, this is a program we do have as a best practice. We do allow homeowners to pay their property taxes monthly. They are due in law 2 times a year, January and June in Franklin County, but the Franklin County Treasurer, a lot of treasurers around the state, offer a monthly payment plan option, which we do recommend. And then certainly those who pay their property taxes through an escrow account, through a mortgage, which is the majority of mortgage holders, also then pay that monthly through that escrow account. It just helps make sure that when the tax is due, people have the money on hand to pay it, as opposed to the lump sum twice a year, which was just last week here in Franklin County. So a couple things we want to avoid. If we're going to reform property taxes, we want to avoid just hard across-the-board limits, especially assessment limits. You don't want to get in a world where you say the taxable value of a house just can't change with the market or can't be subject to regular adjustment. That creates really significant inequity because it's not targeted, it's not tied to ability to pay, and it means that those who have their value increasing the most, who are getting the most equity in their home, that's not being captured. So they're paying the same amount of taxes as those who are gaining less equity in their home. And that's where inequity can come into property taxes, where you have people paying a tax at a value that doesn't reflect the true market of the home. So we don't have an assessment limit, so that's good. The taxation limits are only related in terms of how the tax rate is calculated, kind of that equalization and to new levies. It's not like across the board, you can't have taxes go up by more than X percentage each year, which some states have. And so we do have that, and we have that voted levy limit, so it's good. So we're in pretty good shape on this category in Ohio, but there have been some proposals that would break this, and so we like to highlight it as something we should not break. So this is to sum up the best practices, right? We want monthly property taxes. We have that option in Franklin County. It's an option everywhere in the state. I don't think all treasurers offer it, but a lot of them do. We do not have sufficient targeted property tax relief. We do not have effective state aid to make it so property taxes are not so relied upon by local government. And we believe we have many quality assessment practices, and that's something we're always trying to make better in the auditor's office, is how we go about setting value for property. But we have the laws in place that allow us to do it. So this year, for the last year and a half, we've spent a lot of time talking to legislators, the Franklin County delegation, and leaders in general. There's been really significant legislative attention to property tax in general and to some of these issues. House Bill 1 dealt with a major property tax reform. The operating budget created the Joint Property Tax Review and Reform Committee. Great hearings. If you want to go into the weeds on how property taxes work and the history, the Ohio Channel has all those hearings archived. I really recommend it. Just 12 hours on property taxes just for fun. It also is a big deal. This is something that doesn't really affect Franklin County, but is a big issue around the state, is the 20 mil floor, which is a school funding issue where this equalization process that means that values go up and rates go down is frozen once the school rate hits 20 mils. So that causes major spikes in property taxes if you're in a 20 mil floor jurisdiction. I raise it because it's slowly eating the state. Like 7 years ago, only about half of school districts were on the floor. Now about 2/3 of school districts are on the floor. So it's something the legislature is probably going to take a look at. For Franklin County, there are 4 kind of pillars that we are advocating around, 3 of which have been introduced, 1 of which we're still working on getting introduced in the General Assembly. So we want need-based value exemptions, circuit breakers, homestead modernization, and deferrals. In a perfect world, we would have small doses of each of these so that they could work together to kind of hit people in a variety of circumstances. But any one of these alone would improve and reduce the burden on some homeowners all across the state. So residential stability zones, first bucket, this is the exemptions for need. And the really short answer of this would work like community reinvestment area abatements, but for need rather than development. So you as a local government body could designate a zone in your community and say, you know what, we are seeing values really go up in this area. We are seeing how those value increases are burdening long-term residents. And so they're not benefiting from the investment we're making in their community, from the investment they've made in their community, because they're being burdened by the property tax. So we're going to say, okay, for the next 10 years, they only have to pay property taxes on half of the value increases that are happening to their homes, if and only if their income is below 80% AMI, which is the ceiling in the bill. You could also have control under this program to say, and we're only going to have it be for homeowners that have been there at least 5 years. Or we're only going to have it for homeowners, actually, we'll do it 100% exemption if they only make 40% AMI, and then a 50% exemption if they make up to 80% AMI. So I give those different examples to show, the idea of this bill is to create just a framework and allow local governments to really target this geographically and substantively to meet the needs of their community. This would not come with state reimbursement. We worked on drafting this bill with a coalition and wanted to do kind of three pillars with it, which was to provide targeted property tax relief, be constitutional, and not kneecap the local governments that rely on property taxes. And so the costs are shared between local governments and between the overall tax rates, not falling as much as they would otherwise to cover the cost. So that's how Senate Bill 244 would work. It is actually getting a second hearing, sponsor testimony tomorrow in Senate Ways and Means. Second is circuit breakers. Senate Bill 271, introduced by Senators Blessing and Craig, also getting a second hearing tomorrow in Senate Ways and Means. This is modeled on a proposal that Property Matters Ohio created in detail. Great structure of how that's built. It would set kind of the circuit breaker. It would flip the switch at 5%. So if your property taxes are more than 5% of your income and you make $60,000 or less a year, the state will give you up to $1,000 back towards the cost of those property taxes, assuming that your house is also not like above those thresholds. So that's their starting volley in how circuit breakers could work. Very common for these proposals to have a cap of how much they'll reimburse and have some limit on income. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to have the tax program motivate someone to stay in a house that is no longer the right fit for them, right? You don't want it to be, I can't afford this house, but because of this tax program, I can get it anyways. So that's how to strike that balance. Homestead modernization. We got a tiny bit of homestead modernization in the budget when they at least allowed the value of the exemption to increase with inflation. But with what is happening with values, the actual benefit was still going down. House Bill 60 would increase the income to $45,000 and index it going forward. And it would increase the value up to $40,000, so that's a good chunky increase in the exemption. This is the closest we've got introduced to what we're thinking, though I will say that the Age-Friendly Innovation Center partnered with us, and we kind of would love to see that income a little bit higher still. Deferrals. We have a draft in progress. I don't have as much detail on this. But the basic idea is if you're like, you know what, my property tax is $5,000 this year. I can really only afford to pay $3,000. So I'm going to tell the state, hey, give me an IOU on the remaining $2,000. And that will come due when my income improves or when I sell the house. So this is not a forgiveness. Those taxes will come due. We are advocating a model where the state creates essentially a revolving loan fund to keep local governments whole until that deferral money comes back in and links kind of how much can be deferred to ability to pay. So details forthcoming on that. These programs are also really common around the state, and they provide substantive relief without any actual reduction in the amount of revenue coming in long term. Some of the questions around them are things about like how much interest do you charge, because that adds to the tax burden, but allows the state to not be losing money on it. And you also want to think about not disrupting generational wealth by having the taxes come due with a transfer on death or inheritance. You want to have some ability to account for that, or some of the devil in the details to work out about deferrals. But I will tell you right now, with the residents we're talking to, we'd love to have a deferral option for people who say, like, I just want to stay in my house for my life and be able to do that. Deferrals would be a great option. So those are the buckets. Those 4 pillars are what we're looking at. And they would be able to all pass together or some combination of them. Legislative leadership looks like we're mostly on a long timeline for this. So we're mostly looking at a state operating budget first half of 2025 is when these proposals are likely to be enacted. But we're going to have hearings on them. Legislature's finally going home for the summer after this week, we hope, for their sake as well as ours. But they are having hearings on a couple of these tomorrow. We expect more hearings on these in the fall. And certainly this will be a major topic during the 2025 operating budget. Local governments are critical to this process. Legislators are going to want to hear from their local governments. They're going to want to hear from their cities and townships and schools, the entities reliant on property taxes. They're going to want to hear like, hey, yeah, there are areas we could trim and areas we can't, but we need to have an ability to have stable property tax and have our residents be able to have stable communities. So I appreciate you taking this on as a body this early. And we are happy to be a partner. We are going to advocate for things that in studying this issue and seeing the trends in Franklin County we think are important, but happy to discuss other proposals or how these could work or answer any questions now or in the future. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And I took a lot of your time, so I appreciate that.
No, this is great and a lot of information. I should mention that Director Bethany Sanders is the Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at the County Auditor's Office. So thank you again, Director. I have a couple questions, and then I guess I'll make sure my colleagues all have their questions answered as well. Just to clarify on the residential stability zones, I think I understood that there's no state reimbursement or any kind of carrot. Is there any, it looks like maybe in the 2025 budget,
Yeah. The 2025 budget is really where they're talking about it, just in part because for any programs that would have state funding would probably need to happen in the 2025 budget. The rest of it is the politics of it. This is complicated. Getting people to figure out where the right lines are, it's just unlikely to move before then. This would not need to wait for that budget process just procedurally, but it is just likely to do so. But it would, yeah, it's not state funding, but local governments would need to opt in once the state law is created.
And do you know where Ohio Municipal League is on these 4 issues?
The Ohio Municipal League is not, to my knowledge, taken a position on any of these, maybe on the homestead exemption. But I know the coalition I'm working with has communicated these topics, but they've been introduced relatively recently, and so far I have not seen position statements, but I look forward to getting them as well.
Great, thank you, Director. All right, colleagues?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So one, you said the voice of local government is important. What's the most effective avenue or path to do that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It depends a little bit on the topic, but I think that there's a few different avenues. As a body, if you do form a consensus position, doing those kind of resolutions, like we do support this bill or this idea, those are good things to add. Thinking about moments where, submission of actual written testimony, but a lot of it is just having the relationships with the legislators, which I'm sure you all already have and can develop. And what it's the same thing we're talking to residents about, which is right now this is a topic with a lot of interest on it, but we do need help keeping interest on it until action is taken, because there's a lot of demands for attention and time of the legislature. And so if in 6 months they're not getting calls saying, hey, what are you doing about my property taxes? It would be easy for this to fall off the agenda. So that's the kind of the high level formally resolutions from a body, statements or written testimony and support from individual members, and then just talking to your legislature. And to the degree you are involved, groups like the Ohio Municipal League, groups like the Central Ohio Mayors and Managers as a city, getting this on the agenda of those entities would be great.
I think that's all I had.
Okay.
Thank
We'll
you.
come back to you if you think of anything else.
Process.
Any other questions tonight? Mr. Schnetzer.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Director Sanders, thank you so much. Ton of information here. I'm glad we have people like you to kind of keep track of this stuff. Even for a municipal finance nerd like me, this is a lot. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask an expert such as yourself a little bit about SB 244. And as I'm reading the bullet points, it says it gives cities, towns, and home rule townships as well as counties the ability to create these boundaries. In a city like Gahanna, we receive a relatively small amount of our overall revenue from property taxes. As you understand SB 244, would we only have control over that portion which we are due, or could we theoretically enact a zone that would impact some of those overlapping jurisdictions, such as the township or the school district?
Yeah, so it is, the zones would be created at that local government level, but would apply to all property taxes
Really?
to those homes. So it's, because you're exempting, what a zone would do is it exempts sum of value from taxation.
Okay.
So so it does apply across the board. So that's always a little tough, because when you give that authority to local governments, you're playing with other people's money.
Yeah.
This decision was made by the coalition to model the bill that way, because that is how community reinvestment areas work. They're the most commonly used property tax-oriented economic development tool. And so we thought it was appropriate to use that model and have one type of exemption be for need rather than development, but use that same approach and those same kind of levers. Because frankly, that's the only way to get it done without state funding. Sure. So that's the balance.
Well, that'll be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah.
Maybe just a final question, and if you'd like to follow up with this at another time, that's fine too, if you don't have anything off the top of your head. But we've talked about state legislation. Are there other things that you're seeing other municipalities enact to give direct homeowner relief for property taxes or collateral relief?
So we do, so mostly no is the answer, and we're keeping an eye out. So there's, obviously many municipalities all across the state, so I can't say I'm not missing some, but on the whole, I haven't seen it. And I think part of why is that right now under state law, even cities with home rule have almost no discretion to give a relief that is triggered by property tax. Not only can you not directly affect property tax, but you're not even allowed to create a locally created income tax, city income tax rebate based on how much someone pays in property tax. That's a violation of the existing uniformity requirements for municipal income tax in state law. So your hands are really tied. And so like where we see cities, some of the COVID funds, city and county level, went to general housing cost assistance. So those did really help during the years that they existed. And then it's about balancing the limited dollars that are available. Regionally through MORPC and at the county level, you do have some of the housing repair programs and that kind of thing. So those are always kind of the programs that have that collateral, like, okay, we can't help with your property tax, but this is how we can take some other burdens off your budget. But it's hard to always have those linked up correctly.
All right. Thank you for your time tonight, Director. We appreciate it.
Of course, thank you all very much.
All right, the next item on tonight's agenda is the Public Arts Advisory Committee appointment application process. I just wanted to bring this forward to my colleagues in coordination with Mr. Van Meter and Mr. Weaver. We had posted a request for applications. We had sort of arbitrarily assigned this past Friday as a due date for applications. We received 2 applications, and I wanted to propose that we extend the application deadline until this Friday and see if there might be opportunity for us in the next week or so to make sure that we talk to our network and make sure that we have received all applications from interested residents that we might be able to solicit. Any questions, thoughts on that?
I have a question.
Yes.
We don't have any formal deadline on this, right, of when we have, okay, so extending it isn't going to make us, cut us close with the not having committee meetings in July? Committee of the whole meetings in July, okay.
Yeah. There's no real deadline. I mean, the policy is in effect, but we'd like to get I think we'd like to get the advisory committee organized as quickly as possible, but
Well, the longer it takes us to get the committee organized, then the longer it's going to take us to begin that process and be able to review art and get it publicly placed. So I know we had the 2024 Bright Blocks. We've been able to create a process around that. But certainly, I know council's comments earlier about making sure we had the policy in place and could move forward with that. Obviously, we'd like to get the committee established as soon as possible. But if you extend it to Friday, if that's what I heard, I don't
Yeah.
think that would be a problem.
How many people are on the board? Or
There would be 5 total. So one is a dedicated position for the Gahanna Area Arts Council. The mayor has 2 appointments, and then council has 2 appointments.
And is there any, I know one of the applications we got is someone that's already on a board or commission, so is there any conflict rule? I don't know if that's a city attorney question, but if there's somebody that's already on another board or commission, does that pose a problem to do this as well?
I don't believe there is going to be a conflict with any of our existing boards due to the purview of the PAAC versus each of our boards and commissions. But as that situation arises, I'm happy to take a closer look at that particular situation. But the one applicant that had a crossover is not a conflict.
Okay.
And I think the hope was just to make sure that we had leveraged networks and made sure that the public was aware that we were accepting these applications. And so just to give it a few more days for kind of last call was the thought I had. And then probably schedule an executive session to evaluate the applications and then appoint at the July 15th meeting. All right. Very good. And I guess Director Schultz and the administration will need your assistance with making sure that we're able to correct the posting and make sure that that gets approved as timely as possible, if that would be all right.
I can share that with the communications team.
Thank you.
Can I ask Director Vollmer, do you see any challenge with what was just discussed, given your administration of the policy program?
No, I asked Clerk Van Meter to get me the appointments by July 15th, so this can move forward with all of the other things that are coming up this fall, so this doesn't get delayed.
Okay. We'll anticipate making appointments on July 15th. Thank you.
I think that since there is one person from the Arts Council on, already on there, I would think that anybody else should not be on the Arts Council. I would think that anybody else appointed should not be on the Arts Council, because that would give them, the purpose was people, I wouldn't want a majority of people from the Arts Council on this committee,
Well, I think.
because that would defeat the purpose of not having the Arts Council make the decisions.
I would disagree with that, since it will still be within the oversight of the administration and the city. And I think that every applicant should be deserved consideration, and we can look at it then.
As long as the spirit of the spirit of the purpose of the policy is kept, I guess.
All right, anything else on that item? All right. Next, Section C, items from the Senior Director of Operations. We have sort of a model resolution, or I should say kind of a templated resolution, 28-2024, a resolution affirming the intention of the City of Gahanna to pursue a community choice energy aggregation program with an aggregator to be determined. Director Schultz and Director Weibensinger.
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, you are correct that there is a blank in the bottom of the resolution that was attached to the agenda, in large part because of the process that we, as the administration, were asked to undertake in ultimately selecting a vendor, if you would, to provide aggregation programming to the city. As you know, what we're here to represent tonight is the results or responses to the RFI that we released. Ultimately, we're going to go through just a very brief overview of what gives us the authority to do deregulation type services or aggregation services, not just from a city standpoint, but from a state standpoint. We'll review the request for information, the summary of responses, and then we will talk, take questions and next steps, and hopefully have a spirited dialogue around the responses. I will note for anybody in the audience or looking online or watching online, the responses were aggregated in total on this 11 by 17 sheet that I'm holding up, and that is attached to the agenda. Obviously, there is a stack of materials, if you would, that were also provided. We spared you guys all of that reading. We knew that we had a riveting presentation on property tax, and now we're going to roll into this particular spirited conversation about utility bills, and it is a jam-packed agenda as far as fun goes, so we appreciate that. So moving on here, the legislative history around deregulation, right? But SB 3 in 1999 gave the state the ability to deregulate the electrical industry, which then created a provision for opt-out aggregation programming to be implemented at our level, at the local government level. Basically, what that did was it separated the generation of electricity, the supply of electricity, from the distribution of electricity. The easiest way to think about that is who generates it. who owns the solar farm, who owns the nuclear power plant, who owns the coal plant, and who produces that energy, versus who provides it to your house, who provides it to your house. AEP Corporate provides it to your house in our situation. But they ultimately get it from a source itself, which is also known as the supply. So your bill is primarily broken up into two different sections, a supply section and a distribution section. So in 2000, issue 27 was presented before the voter here in the city of Gahanna, and the city of Gahanna did, at about 70% of the electorate, vote to approve Gahanna as an electrical aggregator. That gives the city here the ability to implement an aggregation program once we have, in 2001 here, an operation and governance plan that is certified ultimately by PUCO. Right? None of us maybe some of us in the room, but none of us sitting at this particular table at least, were with the city back in 2001, and we don't necessarily have a good idea as to why the city never chose to actually go full bore with an aggregation program back in 2001. We were certified. Our plan was certified. But that seemingly is where it stopped, in around the February timeframe, once this body here had adopted the plan. Obviously, this plan, depending on the direction in which we head, and we'll get into some of those details in a little bit here, this plan, if we go in a particular direction, would need to be updated, depending on, again, the direction in which we head, and then we also need to recertify with PUCO as a municipal aggregator as well. So those are two steps one step we have to take. The second step of recertifying our plan is a maybe, depending on the next steps here. So moving on, right? So we were given the authority to create an opt-out aggregation program. So what is an opt-out aggregation program? Just for review, all eligible accounts are automatically entered into the program, right? So one of the presenters, I believe at the end of 2023, they had presented a number of about 61% of any municipality's residential electrical customers are not on their own, or do not select their energy supplier themselves, right? So that basically means that anybody eligible is residents not participating with an active supplier or in some type of other type of program as it relates to electrical aggregation. So we would expect to see something similar, about 61% of our customers or our residents to also not be participating and eligible for the program. Aggregation pretty much creates a turnkey solution for participants, right? So they don't have to actually go out and shop for themselves in a energy choice situation, which we all could be doing currently, right? We can all be searching for and selecting our own contracts and our own electrical suppliers. But again, only about 40% of us are actually doing that. So obviously this creates or can create a potential savings because of the increased buying power that 60% of resident would ultimately give us as a municipal aggregator the ability to buy down a rate on the whole. The choice ultimately does remain with the consumer, right? We heard a lot of this a couple weeks ago when we had introduced the RFI or the concept behind the RFI, right? But the choice ultimately remains with the customer or the resident. If they do nothing and participate if they do nothing, they would ultimately end up participating in our municipal opt-out aggregation program, right? The second option there is to opt out and return to the default supplier, right? So they can return to their regular rate structure that AEP in this instance would be billing them, or they can choose their own. They can go to Apples on the PUCO website, and they can select their own energy supplier. Right? I will say that I think it's of my opinion right here that the consumer still ultimately holds the power. They can go out and get the most competitive rate by going to Apples versus participating in even our electrical aggregation program. But ultimately, it is the customer's choice to participate with us or not to participate with us. A couple other slides, and then this is where it does get a little bit tricky. Some of this is for informational purposes. This way we all have a great idea as to what some of the components are. Obviously, when we break this down, we are talking about really two components. We're talking about the type of energy that we would be purchasing. Basically, are we what's the percentage of renewable that we're purchasing inside of the program? Is it mixed or is it 100%? And then we're ultimately talking the rate. So the rates that we see on the screen currently are the price to compare rate history as published on the PUCO website for AEP specifically, right? So these are the average prices for 2024 all the way down to 2021. I will note that there are 5 auctions per year which set these rates, and that's the averages that you're seeing, again, for 24 to 2020. I will note on the second column, on the 24 line, and on the third column, that is the January to May rate, the first auction, and then the second auction, which just closed most recently at the beginning of June, that's the June rate. I believe that there's another rate that will end up ultimately closing at the end of July. Mr. Renner?
Well, I was just saying, the auction took place in March, and it's effective of June.
It's effective for June.
Yeah.
Correct. Thank you. But the lower left-hand box is my actual utility bill. I fell off my Energy Choice aggregator at the end of October for November. What I would ended up paying, my charged rate was 12.29 cents on a variable rate. The PTC stated rate was 10.9 cents, again on a variable rate. And then when I locked my Energy Choice supplier back in, I locked in a rate of 6.3 cents per year for the next 12 months on that fixed rate. So you're looking at a savings there of, if my math is correct, again, I have my numbers written down here, of almost 6 cents, 5.99 cents per kilowatt. If the average household utilizes 873 kilowatts per month, you would be looking at a savings from November to December when my new rate took effect of $46.30, right? So we are talking a good amount of money, especially when you do aggregation for the first time, right? You know, when I did this back in 2020, when I first became a Energy Choice subscriber, I was also seeing about 5.3 cents per kilowatt at that particular point in time. I will make specific note, right, that the trend of the rate is no longer going up. The trend of the rate is decreasing at this particular point in time. I also think that, you know, at the end of the evening here, when we talk about the action that we're going to take, we're not locking in a rate. We're basically suggesting that we work with a particular vendor, and a lot of this information, as far as term of service, term of contract that we would be signing, the ultimate rate, and those types of things, those are decisions that are yet to be made and will be made further on down the road as we get through this aggregation approval for the residents of the city of Gahanna. So moving on, we did publish a request for information. I don't remember the date that we published the request for information. It was about nine weeks ago, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. This ran through our regular standard city-run process. So that was published, we drafted that in coordination with our PCFO partners. We solicited all of their recommended aggregators. I believe there were 7 or 8 in total. We did receive 4 written responses, which you guys have the responses of. It was written specifically towards residential-only aggregation. It wasn't written towards small business or commercial aggregation at this particular point in time, although those are options. We asked 27 standardized questions, and we got 27 standardized answers. But with any one of these processes, as you guys are all familiar with, you get a myriad of answers depending on who's answering those questions. So the one note that I will make in this slide, I couldn't figure out exactly where to put it, but what we're looking at, right? We had a conversation about COGS, Council of Governments versus other types of aggregators. Other types of aggregators in large part would be considered under this broker column, right? So just think of your real estate broker, right? Your finance advisor who's going to recommend mutual funds and those types of things, right? They do work on your behalf in order to get you to a particular part and piece, right? So a broker brings to the table, if you would, a range of suppliers, right? So all of these energy generators that I've already talked about, you know, they release an RFP and they solicit pricing from all of these energy generators, which then ultimately determine the rate. It's city goal oriented, so we basically tell them inside of the RFP what exactly it is that we're looking for, right? We're looking for a 4-door sedan versus a 4-door SUV, and they go and shop for us, if you would. It does take a little bit longer to implement, at least at this particular stage of the game, because this is the column under which we would have to update our operations and governance plan, right? So that's going to obviously take some time that would not be required under the COG side of the shop, under the COG side of an implementation, because we would be using their operations and governance plan. Also on the broker side, it's our estimation that it would actually take more city resources to implement under a broker, because we would need to review RFPs and do those types of things, a lot of which has already been done, if you would, by a council of governments. Council of government generally has a larger buying power, right? We're one community with about 17,000 households. And when you join a council of governments, obviously you have the buying power of every participant that's in the program. I would say that we're dealing more with regional goals, right? Because each one of these organizations, each one of these COGs has their own goals and objectives that they would like to see implemented, and those end up taking place on a regional level as opposed to just our smaller local level. There are member benefits that come with that come with joining the COG. Those could be things like energy audits, grants, sponsorships, sorry. Community outreach programs, model regulations, municipal pricing, and other types of programs that they do for the collective. Obviously, the broker does offer some of those services, but generally speaking, the broker type services and the supplier type services, they're there to sell electric to you at not necessarily the cheapest rate possible, but at a negotiated rate. And then obviously on the COG side, everything is board decisions are made, as opposed to maybe decisions at this particular level where all 7 of you guys have an equal voice in the decisions. Obviously, the board of directors at the COG are the ones that take our representation. They represent us at that particular point in time. Not intended, I will say this, also that list there is not necessarily intended to be a pro and con list, because I think that each one of those things can be a pro and or a con depending on which direction you're coming at it from.
Can I ask
Yes,
a
ma'am.
question just to make sure I'm clear? So NOPEC and SOPEC are COGs.
Yep.
Am I right in understanding that
Yes, ma'am.
Aspen and Dynergy are then?
Brokers,
Brokers.
suppliers, correct. There's a little nuancey difference between Aspen and Dynegy. Aspen is a traditional broker where they bring 6 suppliers, if you would, which, so real quick, what you guys are looking on the screen, you guys have a narrative response here. You're looking at a one-word response, in some instances doing it justice, in other instances maybe raising more question, but a one-word response for each of the 4 respondents. Aspen being the broker, Ms. Jones, we would fall under, it says governance. I put contract in there, right, because you guys would be authorized, well, it's a zero-sum contract, so it doesn't necessarily need council approval for said contract, but it would fall under a traditional city-signed contract in this particular instance for both Aspen and Dynegy. I'll go down the first 2 columns, then I'll go circle back up to the top for the COGs. Those are the level of communities that they serve. Aspen serves 47 communities in the state of Ohio. Dynegy has aggregation services in 394 communities. Both offer a fixed pricing structure, so there is no variable option, very similar to the way in which I would choose to lock in under the apples-to-apples scenario. Both offer 100% renewable product and a mixed product. Neither listed the shortest term or the longest term that we can sign up for, meaning 1 year, 2 years, 3 years kind of thing, 6 months, right? Supplier-wise, Aspen would release their RFP to 6 different energy generators and then receive those pricings back, and then we would select which supplier we wanted to go with based on those results. Dynegy is an actual energy producer themselves, so therefore we would be purchasing energy from their other divisions. Dynegy did not provide an average cost per kilowatt hour for either renewable or mixed. The R is for their renewable price, and the M is for their mixed brown energy and renewable energy pricing as well. As you can see, Aspen's renewable cost, and this is one of the things I would like to point out, is that their renewable cost is not it's actually less than their brown energy or their mixed energy cost. There is not a tremendous difference from what we've seen, at least on the averages, between 100% renewable and a mixed energy cost. Net metering is something that we specifically asked about. The reason under Aspen it says the supplier option, because there are suppliers that they work with that do not continue the net metering that is allowed. That is allowed in basically every other situation, whether it's Dynegy, NOPEC, and/or SOPEC. Their net metering is basically if you have a solar array on your roof, you're receiving a net metering credit, if you would, on your invoice, on your bill. That would potentially go away depending on which supplier we selected. I would say this as it relates to Aspen. We just would say that they have to offer net metering in order for us to select them if that is something that's, a critical component of what we would want to do. And we have the option to do that, right? We can limit, we could work with Aspen and say we want to limit it to these criteria and go in that direction. Both Dynegy and Aspen also offer limited grant opportunities, of which were not necessarily described very well in the responses. And across the board, everybody offers an opt-in period, anytime at no limit, and an opt-out, a free opt-out, if you would. So no termination fee and no limit of time in which you can enter into the program or exit the program, right? So if you were to go to apples, you can actually sign up for a 3-month contract and you can come in and out of our program, if you would, after that 3-month program is up. Just to hit the highlights on NOPEC and SOPEC, obviously Ms. Jones asked the question, right? NOPEC and SOPEC are the COGs, the Council of Governments. So we do receive some extra member benefits from each one of them. I think they did a very good job, especially in the summary here, of detailing what some of those benefits are. They are not equal from NOPEC to SOPEC, so there is some difference in the list that I gave you. The governance is by General Assembly. Every community that is part of or a member of the COG is on the General Assembly, but then they are largely governed by a board of directors. I will make a note in the asterisk there under SOPEC. The 5 largest communities that are members of SOPEC receive, if you would, an automatic bid to be on the board. We would be, I believe, the 3rd largest community that SOPEC, in the SOPEC membership, next to the city of Cleveland and Dayton. So therefore, we would have an automatic seat on their board of directors. We would fall under the operations and maintenance plan the operation and governance plan of the COG itself. We see the number of communities that each one of them work within. I will make one note that under SOPEC, I show 36 member communities. I think there are 27 or 29 actually participate in their aggregation services. The other remainders, those are some libraries, some soil and water conservation districts, and others that are members to reap the benefits of membership, but they don't necessarily aggregate. They don't aggregate with SOPEC. So the 36 reflects their full membership. Pricing structure for NOPEC is both either variable. We can have a variable option and/or a fixed option, but with SOPEC it is fixed. And then I'm showing a 100% renewable with an asterisk next to it under SOPEC because that is their default option. Terms are either 1 year and 2 year for NOPEC, 1 year to 3 year for For SOPEC, again, those are details that we would end up talking about later on. But both actually have a dedicated supplier. NOPEC deals with Next Era Energy, and SOPEC has an exclusive agreement with AEP Energy, not to be confused with AEP Ohio, what is I guess, the corporate body, if you would, of who delivers your energy to your door. You can see the cost per kilowatt hour, again, not dramatically different from renewable to mixed energy. Both offer net metering options. Both offer a very elaborate, if you would, set of grants, and I probably actually should have changed grants to member benefit in this particular instance. And then, like I've already stated, from an opt-in and an opt-out period and a termination fees, everybody in this particular instance is equal. I'd like to conclude by saying that I do think that regardless of the choice of this particular body, I think that any one of these four folks can actually provide energy aggregation services for us in a very meaningful and reasonable manner. Obviously, I think what I detailed earlier on, the differences between a COG and a broker, I think those things are things that we all need to take into consideration. I do think that from an administrative standpoint, we wanted to kind of hear from the body as to what some of the thoughts and feelings and what some of the goals and objectives of the program are. And that's why we had chosen, with much deliberation on Friday afternoon, how to write the council report, ultimately leaving a blank for us here as a group, if you would, and largely you folks, to fill in who we would like to see us pursue as our electrical aggregator. So with that, I will conclude, and Corey and myself can take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Director. Would you mind putting broker versus COG slide back up on the screen? I think it's slide 7 of 9. All right. All right, colleagues.
I have a quick question on just the comparison. So you said with SOPEC, there's about 20-ish that use the aggregation. Do you know that number on NOPEC of the 240? How many are actually aggregating, or how many are in it for the other perks?
Let me come back to that. I'll
Okay.
scour.
Yes, Mr. Renner.
Thank you. Couple of things. One, while we have this screen up, I want to thank the both of you for the time that you definitely put in to build the RFI and then to put together all the responses. Director, I think that you said this, but I want to make sure it's clear that the costs that you have there for renewables and mixed are definitely averages.
Correct.
Many of them, especially SOPEC, definitely appears to have supplied a range. And so it's a look back in time in history, but it's not really an indicator of going forward.
Correct. What is listed in all of these numbers here is what the respondent chose to answer. As far as question, I believe it's maybe 10 and 11?
Yeah.
Yeah, 10 and 11 is what they chose to answer as the average. Yes, there are some in the SOPEC part and piece. In their long response, they did indicate which each of it's 29, Ms. Jones. SOPEC aggregates for 29 municipalities. They did indicate what each one of those 29, what those rates are.
For 2023 and 2024. It's the
Yes, ma'am.
average for those 2 years.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, I just want to make sure that
But you're
that's
absolutely
clear.
correct, because it is an average, and the average, right, so you got to be careful sometimes when you talk about the average, right? The average on my rate to my price to compare, it was also averages. You know, so when you looked at auction to auction, some of those rates are obviously lower and some are higher depending on the exact auction.
Right. I just want to reiterate that again, because I think you said this as well, and I think it's a very good point. We can join one of them and let the experts, they actually recommend to us when is the best time to lock in and to go for pricing. So just make sure that everybody understands that.
Yes, because it is critical, right? And that's one of the things as we've been going through this and having our own conversations about it, right? If the rate is trending down as the example, when is the right time to lock in? Right, there's a little bit of two trains of thought there, right? Your PTC, your price to compare. I had already illustrated on my own electric bill, right? I was already paying more than the price to compare, right? So there's that impact itself. But we ultimately want to lock in at the lowest rate possible for the longest period of time. So rate and term are ultimately very important because there's at some particular point in time, we can see rates drop even further, right? And now we're below our price to compare. Our rate is higher than the price to compare. So then theoretically, our resident could technically, under our aggregation program, be paying more money than if they were on the open market, right? Or the opposite could happen where they're paying, like in my situation and on the example that I gave you as it related to my bill, where I was paying significantly less.
Right.
So it is a little bit of a game as to when you ultimately lock that rate in and choose to start aggregation. But at the same time, as we all know, this body knows very well that we can't just decide, oh, well, December would be great. We have to march up to December and know that, be doing our due diligence up until that point in time so that we're ready to lock when appropriate.
But the dovetail with that, in my opinion, and we've talked about this a little bit more, and it probably would be good for my colleagues to chime in later, as to what are the goals. To me, the goal is, the value is 100% renewable. We shouldn't really focus on anything else because to your point, Director, residents have other options. So the goal of this was actually to bring in value and get the lowest cost, but also back to the value of 100% renewable. Earlier when you were talking about the opt-in and opt-out, do you know, so I understand that initially, trying to go back to that screen, it was the opt-out aggregation screen. And I don't want to quibble, but it said residential accounts are not participating. So I understand that if they have selected an alternate supplier, that they're not going to get the opt-out letter, but that doesn't preclude them from opting in, correct?
Correct. So there's a couple different scenarios. They could, if they have a penalty to pay for early opt-out on their own, they may not choose to, right?
Right.
If it's free for them to opt out and
Right.
opt into our program, they could do that. They could do that immediately. But that is an action that they would have to take. They're not going to receive. They're not going to receive an opt-out letter from our supply.
But do you
our
know what
aggregator.
that time differential is? Can somebody actually just immediately say, I want to opt in? When this, on day one.
It's a nuance. I think if I'm reading the responses correctly, the initial 21-day opt-out window is only for opt-outs. I don't know that you can have somebody opt in that period.
Okay.
But that's going to be something that we'd have to ask the actual aggregator
Okay.
to clarify for us. But I don't believe it would. It's not months, right, Mr. Renner?
Yeah.
It's a short period of
No,
time that they would be able to
21
opt out and
days
back in. Yeah.
is inside of a month, so
Yes.
if that's the answer, that would actually be fine. We were talking about the operation and governance plan, so back a few months ago, or it feels longer than that, I did put forward and introduce to everybody what the model plan is to join one of the aggregators, the SOPEC in particular, and there also was a model resolution to join and adopt their governance plan. So I just want to differentiate that, you were talking a little bit about, well, we would actually have to do a plan. We don't have to. We can actually just join and adopt their plan.
Only in the COG situation, yes,
In the
you're
COG
correct.
situation, that
Yes,
is
sir.
correct. Yep.
100%.
Okay.
They, I believe, require, I think that's the right word, require us to adopt their governance, their operations and governance plan. We shouldn't have our own. I think in one of the responses, there was a nuance where we could tweak this and tweak that, but by and large, they're falling under their plan itself.
Yeah.
I looked at our plan, I did not read it, I will admit that, but it's not, it's maybe 10 pages long kind of thing. I skimmed both NOPEX and SOPEX, and it's similar as well as far as size and length kind of thing.
Thank you. And then one other thing, well, I mean, my colleagues know I've already put out a bias that I want COG. I'm not really interested in any of the brokers. We can talk about that if anybody wants to. On the grant side of thing, if everybody looks at the responses, I think it becomes night and day between the two COGs, NOPEC versus SOPEC, what the value you get there when it comes to grants and how many, what's the success rate of actually being able to get the grants and the variety of grants that they go after. So to me,
Grant question.
yeah, Jamil, that's a really good question. Director, do you remember offhand?
Question 23 is about the $20 million in successful
Yeah,
grants in
thank
6
you.
months.
Yeah, it would be one of the very fat cells because of SOPEC's response. And I think that, to me, in my mind, really highlights and makes them another one that stands out.
Question 17 also has like, if you have offered energy efficient grants or loans.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I knew it was in 2 places. Both of them also did in their full responses, they did a very magnificent job, if you would, on describing what their member benefits are, which also fall under this same category here, which are not necessarily reflective in total in your, in the summary packet.
Thank you. Again, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Renner? Questions?
Not really a question, but it sounds like, well, first off, let me just say to everybody that's involved in providing this information, thank you. There's a lot to digest here. And it sounds like essentially the stage or the step that we're in is you're looking for some guidance. Do we move forward to start asking for, what is it, bids, or to pursue a specific?
We would want to fill in the blank with a specific vendor.
Okay.
With some identified goals, like some of the goals that Mr. Renner outlined, 100% renewable as an issue, or as an option. Net metering is an option, yeah. That's what we're looking for.
Well, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page as what step we're in.
Yeah.
I have no issue moving forward, but with regard to goals, I do want to go back in time, and I don't know if this was an early '23 occurrence, but I think it was NOPEC that came in, and at that time, the standard choice rate was significantly higher than it is now. And I think they were telling us that they could save residents money. So this concept of aggregation really came to this body under the premise of a savings to residents. The good news is, based on the information that you all have provided to us, is it looks like, depending on the supplier, and it sounds like regardless, that the 100% renewable versus the brown energy, as you referred to it, are very close. In some cases, renewables may be even cheaper. But I don't want to disregard the fact that I think for the average resident out there, the most important thing is going to be cost savings. And so to the extent that 60% of the population would default into this program, we should be mindful of the cost. Again, it sounds like based on the data that we have, those rates are very close. And again, that's a good thing. But if hypothetically we were to move forward and were to find out those rates diverge to a significant degree, that would at a minimum give me some pause.
Yes, Mr. Renner?
100% agree with that last statement, except for one little thing. This is it's choice.
Sure.
And so residents already have a choice to go for the brown energy. again, the goal is to provide something else that's 100% renewable. I do want to dovetail with the question
The
that
net, I think you wanted to speak on net metering. Did you want to mention net metering? No? Okay.
I don't want to call it, but the resolution that's before us, you talked about the filling in the blank. This does not take place of the contract that we would actually have to ultimately go with the aggregator, right? This is just a resolution to mark and say officially, sort of like immortalize, this is council's choice. Is that?
Yes, sir. You're
Okay.
correct. There's a slightly different, if we were to go to the broker, there's a slightly different process than if we were to go with a COG. COG, you're adopting their operations and management plan, and then therefore you need two public hearings. Either COG, contract-wise, it's a little bit, that process is a little bit simpler because it's a zero-sum contract, so therefore it doesn't necessarily need to be presented to you folks for approval. The mayor could sign that because it's a zero-sum contract.
Understood.
Doesn't cost us anything.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Schnitzer had a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you. It's been some time since I've been on the Apples to Apples website. The last time I shopped it, I think, was probably Q1, Q2 of last year. And if I remember correctly, and perhaps something has changed, but everything that we're talking about, residents can go and do on their own.
100%.
Including choosing 100% renewable, including choosing brown if that's what they prefer. What I think we're trying to do is capture that 60% that either don't know about it or don't care to go and do it. So again, my prior comments remain in that I don't want to lose sight of the cost savings. But again, based on what we're seeing, those rates are very close. But should they diverge, it would again, at a minimum, give me pause.
I do think that when a potential path forward is discussing with the chosen aggregator term, type, and ultimately cost, right? So still go and get the information from whoever it is, even if this body says it needs to be 100% renewable. We could still go get that mixed cost though that we see and that the resident can see. Well, is what Mr. Schultz said significant or not significant, right? I know on Apples to Apples right now, 12 months fixed for mixed energy is 6.3 cents. 12-month fixed for 100% renewable is 7 cents. To some, is that significant? Is that not significant, right? So that's ultimately the choice. So we can go out when we select who it is that we want to be our aggregator partner, and still have them provide that level of information so that we're making decisions and ultimately ratifying a contract that makes the most sense to this body here.
So if I could chime in here. I think to Mr. Schnitzer and to Mr. Renner's points, the generation rate last year through AEP was 12 cents per kilowatt hour, just to put this back into context. And this year, that rate has decreased, so the retail price is almost 7.7 cents per kilowatt hour. So this is incredible. I mean, this is very exciting to see these numbers, to see these averages. My hat's off to the administration for really running with this. I know you weren't necessarily expecting this, but this is a phenomenal job that you all have done. And thank you to the four vendors who have responded to the RFI. I think this is an incredible opportunity for our community to join with some other communities in Central Ohio to move towards green energy aggregation. For me, and as I've already spoken to, this is an opportunity to do both, to move our community into 100% renewables while offering a cost savings and educating residents about their choices to either use apples to apples or stay with their traditional energy generator or to remain in our opt-out program. So I think this is awesome. I have some questions just to make sure I'm crystal clear on the responses. I'm just going to go through my list. Mr. Schultz, you mentioned that 40% of Gahanna residents are using apples to apples. Were you able to obtain that?
That's PUCO's 23 market study, which I believe is statewide.
Okay,
Which
that's
you
a
would think that that transfers down to the city of Gahanna. I'm making the assumption that that transfers down.
Okay. We contacted PUCO and were unable, that was not publicly available information, so we were unable to get that data. I was just wanting to clarify.
I took that from one of the presentations that either NOPEC or SOPEC gave. It's possible that it was PCFO, not to be confused, too many Ps. It might have been PCFO's presentation that they give before this body at some point too.
That would make sense, and they would probably have that information from the ineligible, just sort of being able to determine that ineligibility list. But thank you for clarifying that. For Aspen, they indicated that they have capability to do 100% green. Do you know if that was also through using the RECs?
I believe they're all through using RECs, correct?
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Using what? What did you say?
So RECs, they're renewable energy credits.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that we had that information clarified. I guess this is not a question, but in response to you asking us about net metering, yes, I think a couple of us have heard that from residents, that that's important to our community, for those who do have solar panels. So yes, that would be an important component. So back to the grant funding, it's a little hard to compare between the two.
It's really not comparable.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, even when you read the full proposal, they both offer programs. They might be geared in different directions, but at some particular level, they're offering some level of community support, if you would, through some level of grant or financial assistance, if you would, to do something. But yes, you are correct. They do different things.
Okay.
Their goals and objectives are different.
So the $20 million that SOPEC has been able to secure just in 6 months has really translated to funding at the local level of sustainability initiatives?
I'd have to dive back in very specifically. I know that they spent a lot of time talking about their support of rural development, which I don't necessarily know qualifies us here in the city of Gahanna. But yeah, I think a good portion of that 20 million is geared in that particular direction.
Okay. And then I just also noted really great responses, particularly from the Council of Government vendors on their community service responses to question 18. Really comprehensive responses, and particularly from SOPEC.
I'll say, to add just a tick of color there, right? I think the COGS are generally, they're more geared towards what it is that this government does, right? They are public service oriented, where the other two, the brokers, are more, it's more transactional, is kind of how I read the proposals. There's nothing necessarily wrong with either approach. You know, we use transactional vendors all of the time. But one, you definitely got a much more community level feel and public service feel, and the other was a little bit more transactional and a little bit more mechanical, if you would, in their approach to implementation.
And then the last thing I'll just note is, as far as a factor that I take interest in, I very much appreciate the fact that Gahanna would be able to have a seat at a leadership table and really continue to be supportive of green energy initiatives across the state. So I note that as well as being a really powerful factor in my mind. any questions or discussion? Yes, Ms. Padova and Ms. McGregor.
Thank you guys so much for all of your work on this. This is a lot to digest, and I'm sure that you guys have spent a lot of time with all of these answers here. I have a couple questions. First is for the term, so just looking at the small chart that you guys compiled, which thank you, this is a lot easier to quickly glance at. For the term, Aspen and Dynegy don't have anything listed there, but NOPEC and SOPEC are 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 years. Do we choose how long that is? And is there any benefit of going is the benefit of going longer so that then if rates go up after a year, we have a lower rate locked in?
So I looked at apples to apples today to get those couple of numbers there, and actually, the longer the term, the higher the rate. So I don't have a great answer for you. I think that I would say on the flip side of that is that with what the rates are doing, I would think that the shorter the term, the better, gives us the most amount of flexibility to make adjustments if rates dipped below what we negotiated, quote unquote, 12 months prior, in my head. But I think as the process plays out, we'll know what that looks like a little bit better.
Okay. And is that something that going through this process, is Mr. Florida still going to be kind of helping with giving advice of this is why you would want to do 1 or 3 or 2 years? That type of thing? Okay.
I picked up the phone on Friday to call Joe and say, hey, help me understand what I'm supposed to be doing for Monday. Yeah, so they will remain involved as well.
Okay, good to know. And is there any, I think both NOPEC and SOPEC said that the opt-out rate is usually pretty low. But is there any minimum, like it has to be at least this many, like if 50% of the letters came back and said they wanted to opt out, is there any kind of minimum that we have to agree to? Or if rates dropped substantially and everybody said, oh, we're going to go do apples to apples, would it?
I do not believe so.
Okay. And then going with the COG, I believe you said, going with the broker actually is, would take a lot more city resources. With the COG, will they deal with like the opt-in, opt-out, the letters? Is that?
To be clear, the broker deals with those as well, right?
Okay.
I think we have a little bit more upfront with the broker because we have to update our plan. We have to release the RFP, so there's a lot more review and so on and so forth that would fall on our shoulders in order to accomplish. Whereas with the COG, a lot of that work is already done, and they're basically just executing on their plan. So it's a little bit more streamlined, I think, when you're dealing with a COG versus when you're dealing with a broker who's really working on our behalf at that particular point in time.
Okay.
I mean, if you looked at Aspen as an example, I think Aspen inside of their proposal, they said we would be aggregating, if you would, the first bill in early 2025. And I think when you look at either NOPEC or SOPEC, I forget which, you're looking at about 120 to 150 days, not necessarily on a fast track, but you can see the difference there.
Okay. And then if someone was they were already using the apples to apples and then decided they wanted to opt into whatever we were doing, would they be reaching out to the city? If they called the city, would we just refer them to whichever?
Correct. Whoever our
we choose.
aggregator is, we would send them to that supplier. So we
Okay.
wouldn't even necessarily send them to any of the 4 people that you see on the screen. We would send them to where it says supplier, and about the middle of the screen, that's where we would likely be sending them,
Okay.
to the energy company itself.
So it would be fairly easy for somebody to switch over if that's what they
Almost
want
as
to do.
easy as using the apples to apples, except I believe you need to make the phone call as opposed to going on a website and
Okay.
signing up.
Okay. I think that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Do you want to give any direction?
I think based on the information that we have here, I think that going with a COG seems like a better option. It seems like we get more benefits out of that. And it would also seems to be a little bit quicker, more helpful, and not take up as much city resources. And I would like to keep city resources to a minimum on this to the extent that we can.
Mrs. McGregor?
I know I'm probably in the minority, but I think the lowest price, I mean, they are not significant in this paper, but as Mr. Schnetzer said, if they become more disparate, I would go for the lowest. And I think that if the brown energy is lower, I would go for that, because I think the people that apples to apples is available to everybody if they have a computer, if they know how to use the internet, if they have time to do it. And I think the people that will be hurt most by, saying, oh, you can go to apples are the people that don't know, that don't have the time to do it, that older people that don't know how to use a computer to do it. And I think that's the people that are going to be, maybe they don't even have a computer at home. And I think those are the people that are going to be affected by saying just go to apples. So I think that we should be providing them with the lowest cost in the program, that they don't have to go to apples if they could just use the program to get the lowest rate. And some people, a fair number of people in this city still have all-electric homes, which is, the average cost is, that's a big difference when you're talking about, you said 840 kilowatts per hour, or per month, I think? Per month. That's a really low kilowatt. I mean, we have an all-electric home. That's like, if I get 840 kilowatts, I'm like, yay, because we have all electric. Now, we don't have any gas, but that's, but I think that's going to be the people that it hurts the most by saying, oh, you can go to apples, is there's a lot of people that don't know or don't have the ability to do that. So I'd be in favor of the lowest overall cost, no matter the source.
Any further questions or discussion? Directors, do you feel like you have adequate direction?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
I need a blank filled in if at all possible.
I think Mr. Renner has suggested his preference is SOPEC. Again, I really appreciate both Council of Governments, and I recognize that you're both in the room, and that means a lot to this community, so thank you. I think based on the couple of factors that I've already referenced, I'm also in favor of going with SOPEC.
I would put my preference in the SOPEC column as well, based on information that we've discussed here.
I agree. I would, it seems like SOPEC has a lot more to offer for this, so that would be my choice as well.
I guess I'm going to maybe pass. The only thing that concerns me about SOPEC is that NOPEC has so many more residents. They have 240 communities, SOPEC has 36.
Yep.
So I mean, like, I'm like, why? That alone gives me pause.
SOPEC is a younger organization.
SOPEC is a younger organization. I would say that I think when you look at, I don't have populations. I thought about grabbing them real quick, but when you look at the city of Cleveland and the city of Dayton, they're probably serving. They could potentially actually even be serving more residents than NOPEC serves. I don't know those numbers. That's not. Don't quote me on that, but that would be my suspicion. And Cleveland and Dayton are the two. They are more recent to SOPEC than the other more long-standing communities.
Mr. Schnetzer, do you have a comment on
It
this?
seems, based on what I've heard, SOPEC would be
Okay.
seems to be the most appropriate.
All right,
Now I have
Director,
what I
you have, okay, fantastic. Excellent. Again, I'm just thrilled. I think this is just such an asset, and really, thank you all for your work. This is incredibly meaningful, so thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Corey. Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda, items from the city attorney, ordinance 45-2024.
Thank you, Madam President. This ordinance is coming forth before you today due to our success in litigation with the City of Columbus regarding the preemption litigation. With the permanent injunction against the state, we are permitted to move forward with our Tobacco Retail Licensing Act. In order to do that, we needed to contract with the Board of Health for Franklin County Public Health to implement the compliance checks, et cetera, and actual enforcement of our ordinance. They have some logistical challenges, which is that they administer compliance for multiple communities, and they're not able to do a different renewal date for multiple communities. And so they have asked us to shift our contract term for the license term to be ending on December 31st. So the new term would begin on January 1st and run for 1 calendar year. Currently, our ordinance indicates a March 1 term beginning for our licenses. The effect of this is that we are kind of at an awkward stage, which is that March has come and gone, and because of the litigation pending and the effective date of that preemption ordinance or statute, we haven't implemented this ordinance yet. And so the proposal that I am recommending is that the first initial term begin and the registrations start to happen by September 1. And then that term will end December of 2025. And this was also recommended by Franklin County Public Health. Thereafter, just the applications would be due December 1st, and the term would start January 1 and would run for that calendar year. The other portion of this ordinance is striking some language in 737.14, which discusses other laws and specifically discusses preemption. Given our position and our success in litigation in challenging the preemption in the state, I believe this ordinance language conflicts with our position in our current status with the law that has been declared unconstitutional. And so I'm asking to strike that first clause of section 737.14. I believe that summarizes the ordinance.
Thank you, City Attorney Tamala Larison. And before I open it up to questions, I'll just note that I think that it was our intent to not cause a problem, and that was the reason for that language. But we appreciate your work on this. Any other questions or discussion on this item?
Just,
Yes, Ms. Padova.
just wanted to thank you for keeping this going and making these updates so that we can keep moving on this. So appreciate your help.
Thank you.
All right. And no feedback, no discussion from the administration on this one? Is the administration satisfied?
No, I think certainly with regard to the impacts of the lawsuit that they've had, adjusting the terms completely makes sense, and I think the timeline makes sense for what's been proposed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mayor Jadwin. Is it a consent agenda for ordinance 45?
Yeah.
All right, great. Resolution 28 that we just discussed would be, I think, on for regular agenda since Mr. Weaver is not here tonight, and to give an opportunity if there's any further discussion on that item. Okay, next on the agenda, items from the Department of Finance. We have ordinance 46, 2024, an ordinance authorizing supplemental appropriations regarding the ARPA Fund 2330. Director Burry?
Good evening. So the first action is a request for supplemental appropriations for ARPA. When we receive the funds, we're heading up to that deadline to get them obligated by the end of this year and then spent by the end of 2026. Some original programs that were identified, we realized that we couldn't meet those timelines, and then we had a change for the CAD program. So that left $876,000 still available to be appropriated. So we kind of looked at ongoing projects that we had. We kind of lasered in on that Claycraft project because, clean drinking water was part of the initial initiatives for it. And that project is pretty much done. So we have little risk that we're going to be stranded with any funds that we're going to have to turn back in. So asking for the supplemental appropriation for the internal grants to grant that to the Water Capital Fund for that project.
Any questions? And Director, thank you for the explanation. Were there any other projects or uses that were considered for these funds?
Yeah, so we looked at the water tower project, but again, we didn't feel that that was far enough along in the process, and we're concerned that we wouldn't meet those deadlines. We also considered the street program as another project to maybe put some funding towards, but then thinking about what the spirit of the ARPA funds were, and knowing that they really did hone in on that clean drinking water.
All right. Thank you, Director. Mr. Schnetzer?
Thank you. Director Bray, would this potentially slow the rate of, the water fee increase over time?
Yeah, it will alleviate some pressure on the Water Capital Fund, but it doesn't stop the need for projects to continue. So I would never tie a grant funding to any type of rate adjustment.
Okay, thank you.
Wishful thinking, Mr. Schnetzer.
I'll try.
Consent agenda for ordinance 46? All right, great. Resolution 27-2024?
So this is for the tax budget required by Ohio Revised Code. Has to be passed and filed with the Franklin County Auditor by July 20th. Allows the Budget Commission to establish our rates without any adjustment, shows that we truly need those rates and levies as they are. The conclusion of this will be when the Budget Commission sends back the rates and amounts for you all to approve by resolution around October-ish. So this is a request to pass the resolution, to pass the tax budget, and give me authority to file it with the county auditor.
Thank you, Director. Any questions or discussion? All right, consent agenda for this item?
Please.
Regular routine.
Yes, I'd say. All right, thank you, Director. All right, we have two items. Item F from the council office. First is a notice to legislative authority regarding a permit from the Ohio Division of Liquor Control, 2024-0119. Clerk Van Meter.
Just real quick, I did reach out to the Division of Police. There are no objections to this notice. So if council has no objections, I will just go ahead and mail this back to the division.
Yeah, and this looks like it's purely just a change of the LLC's ownership interests.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Resolution 26-2024, a resolution honoring Disability Pride Month. Councilwoman Jones, would you like to discuss this item?
Yes, so July marks Disability Pride Month, which was originally started in recognition of the ADA being passed in 1990. So we wanted, or I'm proposing a resolution to recognize that month and have invited special guests from the GEAR program of the district, the Extended Support Services program, so this is the high school program behind the Barkery dog treats, and then also Gahanna Special Olympics. I have made a few content shifts in the resolution since the agenda was posted. I have shared that red line with you. It's just minor tweaks to make the resolution a little bit more specific. Councilwoman McGregor, thank you for your typo edits there as well, so that we have those, but open for other discussion on these.
Anyone have any discussion? No. All right. Thank you, Councilwoman Jones. And I understand that there will be a honorary presentation.
Yes.
On the 1st as well.
On the 1st, yes. And we will have a representative from each of the groups, so GEAR, Special Olympics, and ESS program.
Wonderful. We'll welcome a full house on the 1st.
Yes, it will be hopefully a packed house.
Excellent.
So,
Okay.
thank you.
So I'm fine with the edited or redlined version going on consent agenda. Is everyone else all right with that? All right, perfect. Anything else for this evening? No? All right, well then we'll adjourn for the night. Thank you, everyone.